Hello and welcome. I'm Bernadette Schwerdt. I'm the founder of the Australian School of Copywriting, and our topic today is how to overcome imposter syndrome and self-sabotage. Now, the question isn't like who feels this. The question is who hasn't felt this, okay? I still feel this every single time I sit down to write a piece of copy. And I just want you to know it's really, really natural. I'm not the only one who feels this. I've interviewed a lot of creative people over the years, and they all say the same thing. And even the big names, of literature, like Bonnie Garmus, who wrote Lessons in Chemistry, she says the same thing every time she sits down to write something for the first time. It's like she's never written before. Leanne Moriarty also feels the same way. Salman, Rushdie, they are all on the record as saying that they don't feel confident at the start of a new project. And they are very experienced writers. And in fact, what they all have in common is they were all copywriters as well. So if you are thinking about becoming a novelist, then becoming a copywriter as a starting point is a really, really awesome thing to do, because the skills you learn as a copywriter can very much inform your novel writing as well. That's another topic, but just so you know, the imposter syndrome is really common. It's all part of the writing process. And that's what makes it exciting, right? Because when you sit down to write something and that, you're not sure and there's the uncertainty, it creates an adrenaline spike. And that's what makes writing so exciting, is because you're feeling all these emotions about, can we do it or can we not? If you wanted certainty, if you wanted things just to be transactional, then become an accountant, because everything adds up at the end of the day. And it's very, very easy to see if you're on track or succeeding. But with writing, there's a lot more to it. And that's, I think, why a lot of people love it, is because it's a chance to truly express themselves and then put it out to the world and see how it lands. So you're in the right place today if you want to feel more confident about your writing abilities, you want to get paid to write copy, and you want to get paid what you're worth. So if they're the things that you'd like to feel, you are absolutely in the right place right now. A couple of truths about imposter syndrome and copywriting, right? And the first one is, you know more than you think. Okay, you've probably done more courses, read more books, and know more about copy than your clients ever will. Some clients don't even know what copy is. So when you come into a relationship with a potential client, you're probably thinking you don't know very much, but they know even less than what you think you don't know, right? Because their world is accounting, or it's making hairbrushes, or it's making computers. That's their world. It's not copy. They're not immersing themselves in the world of copy the way you are, right? So just know you know more than you think. And number two, you don't need to be brilliant to get work. Most novice copywriters are better writers than their clients ever will be. Just showing up, doing the work, and finishing the job will set you up for future success. So don't feel that you have to be brilliant before you actually start looking for work, because just the doing of it will make you better. But also, these people generally can't write, and that's why they're hiring you to do so. They don't know what to look for. So that's part of the education process that you need to take them through. So don't feel like you've got to be amazing and the best to get work. I see a lot of people get work. You probably see the advertising in the current environment, and you're going, wow, someone was paid thousands to come up with that. That's not very clever. It's not very good. And they're professionals working in advertising agencies, right? So just know there's room for everybody, and you don't have to be brilliant to get work. And the last point is, others less talented than you get work. So talent really is overrated. My advice to you is focus on getting one client only, not 10, but one client. Do the work, get paid, and move on to the next job. Okay, it's about progress over perfection. What we're doing is just words on the page. We're not saving lives. I had a boss who used to say that all the time when things were getting really heated before a pitch to a client. We're not saving lives. There's no one bleeding or dying. It's just words, right? The stakes are generally low. Okay, they're important at the time, right? And you want to do a great job, but in the scheme of things, the stakes are quite low. So moving on to self-sabotage, it's a really interesting topic, I think, because what happens here is we self-sabotage without even knowing that we're doing it. It's a very subconscious process, or unconscious, and it's really insidious, and it stops us from succeeding. And we don't even know why we're not succeeding. It's self-sabotage is at work on a very deep level. So It's about thoughts and beliefs, which we'll cover another day, but here's some really, really practical ways to overcome it. But first up, how do you know if you're self-sabotaging, if it is subconscious? Well, here's some telltale signs that you might be self-sabotaging. So, for example, do you leave things to the last minute? Now, you won't be Robinson Crusoe if you do that. I certainly do that. I've certainly done that. I'm better than I used to be by a long shot because I don't like the stress. So I know enough now to think, I know why I do it. I do it because it creates adrenaline. It makes me motivated and it helps me make quick decisions, right? So it makes me feel excited. And that's our body craving, that sort of emotion. So I've learned not to seek that emotion. It's not healthy for me. As a result of leaving things to the last minute, it leads to the next point, which is you submit substandard work, right? So if you know you've left things, you're just doing, last minute piecemeal patching up jobs, the work you're going to submit is not fantastic. So it's kind of self-referencing and it kind of completes the cycle about why you won't succeed because you basically, fulfilling your self-prophecy. And as a result of not submitting great work, you don't feel confident about it, which leads to the third thing, which is you don't chase up the revisions. Now, clients generally won't chase you down, like you have to chase them up with revisions. So just so you know that, it happens a lot. And as a result, if you don't chase up, the work doesn't get completed and you don't get paid. Now, you don't chase it up because you don't believe in the work that you just did. And what that says to the client is you don't care, you don't believe in yourself, you don't really want this. That's a really bad thing as a signal to send to a client. And they'll just sit on it and they'll think, you know what, I didn't like it maybe, or I haven't got the time to finish this, so it just dies a death and you never actually get paid the full amount. The next thing that it leads to is, let's say you do submit it and you do chase it up and then it gets done, but you still don't believe in it. So you don't actually chase up your invoice, which is even worse, right? Now, I've absolutely done this only once and I swore I would never do that again because years later I'm looking, why did I let that happen, right? Because it was just my lack of belief in myself. And this is bad, right? You've done the work, but you don't think you deserve it because, you don't think you deserve the money because you don't believe in the work. So again, really bad sort of cycle of doom. And the next one is you don't follow up a warm lead or even a cold lead or a hot lead, right? Somebody might say to you, I want it, but not now. Can you contact me in a month or 2 or 3 months? What you should do is just diarize that and go, okay, I will, and you follow up. And that's the kind of actions that really do develop good relationships because people think, oh, wow, she listened, she cared, she followed up, she believes in herself. And the last one is you don't actively promote yourself, right? So if you don't have a website, you don't have your LinkedIn profile sorted out, you don't talk about yourself when you're going out and about your daily life about being a copywriter, they are all sort of subtle signs that you don't believe in what you're doing. All of those combined create self-sabotage. They're very subtle, they're very insidious, and they're very invisible in many respects, and you don't know why you're doing what you're doing. So here's a couple of ways to overcome self-sabotage if you identify with any of those. And the first one is to ask, what's the worst that can happen? Let's just say you went for it. You didn't feel confident, you didn't feel like you knew what you're doing, but you said yes anyway, and you started work on the project. What's the worst that can happen? Well, let me take you through just a quick example of one of my clients, Radek Sully. I co-authored his book, How to Build a $1 Billion Business. And he is or was the former CEO of Swiss Wellness. So he came into this company as a COO, became CEO, and he was on good salary, right? But not millions of dollars worth. And throughout that career, he was invited to buy into the business to the tune eventually of like $14 million. So lots of money on the table. And he had to ask himself, do I invest in the business? Do I really invest in me? Because the success of the company is up to me. And he used the litmus test of what's the worst that can happen. And in fact, that was a management strategy that the entire team used to identify opportunities as to whether they should do something or not. So even though it's a throwaway line, it's actually a really, really strong strategy for determining action. And so he said to his wife, who's his confidant, he said, if the worst happens, we borrow the $14 million, we're paying interest on it, like it's a lot of money, and it doesn't work, we will go bankrupt. And she and he agreed, well, we can live with that. we'll just live in a caravan on the beach and start again. We started with nothing. We can rebuild. And if it goes really well, we're sitting in clover. We're going to be multi-millionaires. So they said yes to the shares, and they bought the shares and took the interest rate as it was and really invested in it. And of course, the business succeeded wildly. They sold it for 2.1 billion after 10 years, and he now lives on the beach, but not in a caravan. I can guarantee you that. So, what's the worst that can happen? If you really ask that question and you can live with the consequences, then you go for it. No, tip number 2, and this really strikes fear into the heart of a lot of people, but it's really useful to think about just saying yes and work the rest out later, and just trust that it will work out. And this is where you do a course, or you get education, or you get coaching, or you get a sounding board, so that you get the work first, but then you work out how to do it, right? Just step by step. That concept of having everything in a row before you actually say yes doesn't exist. So you do have to step into the unknown a little. So there are 4 options, because most people never actually see this through to the nth degree. Now, they just kind of stop with, oh, that would be fearful. That would be bad. That would make me feel nervous. I feel I'd let them down. I'd tarnish my reputation, right? But you don't even have a reputation yet, so there's nothing to tarnish. But if you really take this through to the final consequence of what does this really mean to you, suddenly you'll start to see it's actually not that scary. So let me do it for you. Let's say you get an opportunity to get a copywriting job, but you feel all those emotions of imposter syndrome. You just don't want to do it. You just don't feel confident. You don't want to let them down. So you walk away. You say no. And then you have to find a new client and go through all that again. And then they have to find a new copywriter, which is annoying for them because they thought they found one. And you part ways. So the upshot is you get nothing. By saying no, you get nothing. Option 2, you say yes to the job, even with all those emotions that you're feeling, and it goes badly. Like, the worst that can happen happens. They hate the work. They don't want to, work with you anymore, and it's just awful, right? That happens. It's happened to me. It's happened to nearly every student I've ever worked with. So just know it happens, but it's the successful students and copywriters who keep going, right, that prevail. If you give up then that's obviously your destiny. But just know this is normal. The client doesn't like the work. It goes really badly. You part ways. Not ideal, but it happens. But the upshot is you get paid a bit because you put through your invoice deposit. You get some experience, which is amazing, because even though it was bad, you learned a lot. Maybe you thought, I should have done more work. I should have asked different questions. I should have done things differently. You get knowledge on what not to do next time, right? That's gold. And that's the kind of stuff that really stays with you as new learning. Option 3, you say yes, and it goes okay. Great, not perfect. They want some changes, which is standard. We always give 2 rounds of revisions with everything. You make the changes, great, happy days. Job gets done. The upshot, you get paid, you get experience, you get a testimonial, and you get confidence as well. All the things that you want from a job. It's a bit messy, it's a little bit patchy, but you get it done. And truly, that is the most common outcome of most copywriting jobs. All those things just happen. This happened to me all the time. Last option, you say yes, and it goes great. The first draft is approved. They love it. They love you. No changes required. It's going to print, whatever. You reward yourself. You go and get a massage, or you get a spa, or you get a meal or a movie, whatever you do to reward yourself. The upshot, the job gets done. You get paid, you get experience, you get testimony, you get confidence to do it all again. So if you can live with any of these options, then you can start to see that saying yes is actually not that bad, right? Because there's actually upsides to all of them. The only thing there's not an upside to is saying no. That leads to 0 for everybody. Tip number 3 is do the work. Not a popular tip, because people go, I thought this was just going to come naturally and easily to me, and it might, but it really, really helps if you do the work, so that when you do present, it's good, you feel confident, you can pursue the revisions, you can pursue the invoice without thinking, didn't do my best. Steve Martin is one of my favorite comedians, and I follow him. I love all his work, and I heard an interview with him, and they said to him, Steve, you've been performing all your life, you're doing these shows, do you still get nervous? Surely not. He goes, I really, really do. And they said, well, how do you overcome the nerves? And he said, well, I do the work. I learn my lines. I rehearse like crazy. I seek feedback. I give myself plenty of time. I create the conditions where, I can build up my confidence and just know that when I present, it's the best that I can do. And what happens, he said, is when I get out on stage, that little part of my brain that's dedicated to fear and imposter syndrome and all the things that, kind of undercut the performance, they're dealt with because I know in my heart I've done the best that I can. And now it's time to enjoy, and it's time to just be present, listen, and see where things go. And that's the state you want to be in when you present copy. Just know that you've done your absolute best. Another man who believes in doing the work is Kevin Hart, the comedian, and he puts this on his Twitter or X profile. He said, my name is Kevin Hart and I work hard. That pretty much sums me up. Everybody wants to be famous, but nobody wants to do the work. So I'm saying this because these are the titans of their industry. They are the best of the best, and they work all the time. They work really hard. So I like that because it just shows that no matter how good you get, you've got to keep working. And that's where you do the courses, you get the coaching, you get your sounding boards worked out. And the last one, which is a little maudlin, so I did debate whether I'd include it or not, but I thought it was important because it happens a lot when I go through this experience. But my father died 15 years ago. And whenever I go home to Adelaide and visit my mum, she invariably goes, can we, go and visit Dad at the cemetery? I go, yeah, let's have a fun day out at the cemetery. So we drive an hour because it's miles away. And we get there and we clean up the grave and we change the flowers and have a little moment with Dad and sort of reflect. And then as I'm sort of looking around the cemetery and I start looking at other graves, because I've always found them interesting about who lived and died, I noticed this little bit here, which is a little dash. And it's the bit, after you're born and it's the bit before you die. And that little dash represents what we commonly call life. And here's an interesting thing. If you have some perspective, you look down, you think, my entire existence has been condensed into that dash. That's the sum total of all I did on earth. And that really helps me get perspective because I think, what am I worried about? A bit of rejection, a bit of failure, someone not liking what I did. I can live with that. What's the worst that can happen? I've just gone through that. So whenever I feel sometimes beaten down and things aren't going well, I sometimes find looking at obituaries or things like this very powerful because it makes me realize we're all going to die. We're all going to end up here, very maudlin, but nonetheless, it makes me think, give it a shot, have a crack, give it a go. What's the worst that can happen? So in summary and in closing, my recommendation, if you want to overcome imposter syndrome and self-sabotage, is just go for it, say yes, and work the rest out later, and you will work it out. Thank you for being here and hearing this presentation because it is such an important concept in terms of being successful as a copywriter. So there are some tips on how you can overcome imposter syndrome and self-sabotage. Thanks for joining me.